Throughout time, in moments of struggle, people have reached out to each other to offer aid, assistance, or comfort. This is especially prevalent during wartime, where keeping morale is incredibly important for all aspects of the conflict. The Afghanistan war was sparked by the 9/11 terrorist attacks, in which 2 planes hijacked by al-Qaeda crashed into the Twin Towers, resulting in around 3,000 deaths. On October 7, 2001, the U.S. launched their first attack against al-Qaeda and Taliban forces within Afghanistan. From there, the conflict grew.
The Taliban was quickly overthrown, but the war transitioned into a prolonged conflict as the U.S. and coalition forces faced a growing insurgency. Over the years, efforts shifted toward rebuilding the Afghan government and military, while peace talks with the government repeatedly stalled. In 2020, the U.S. signed a withdrawal agreement with the Taliban, and by August 2021, as American troops pulled out, the Taliban rapidly regained control of the country, marking a chaotic end to the 20-year war.
Hello, my name is Liza Murphy, and I'm here with Liza. Today we're speaking with Keith Walters, a former U.S. military officer who served in Afghanistan. He's here to share his experiences and perspectives on the war. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, to start this off, I would like to ask, tell us a little bit about yourself. That's what I was trying to say.
So, like you said, I'm a retired military officer, served 23 years in the U.S. Army, following 4 years at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Following my retirement from the military, I served another 5 years in the U.S. government, but I continue to work in the U.S. foreign policy, U.S. defense strategy space. Been here in Burke, Virginia for about 10 years. The military brought me here to an assignment in the Pentagon, and we've stayed since military retirement, so you know the rest about my family. You know them very well.
Oh yeah.
Right? So it's good to be here with you guys.
A witness to this, Major Keith Walters is a retired U.S. Army officer who served with distinction in both Iraq and Afghanistan. During his deployment to Afghanistan in 2011, he was part of the 4th Infantry Division's 2nd War Horse Brigade, where he played a key role in coordinating security for high-level peace conferences involving Afghan tribal and religious leaders. His leadership and commitment to fostering collaboration between U.S. and Afghan forces were instrumental in advancing mission objectives during a complex and challenging period of the war. Here, Walters elaborates on his life and introduction to the military.
Can you tell us about what made you want to join the military to start off?
Of course. It goes beyond just tradition in the Walters family, which goes back several generations of service. And then my father served 30 years in the United States Air Force from 1951 to 1981. And so there's always been a tradition and sort of a motivation to serve our country. Mm-hmm. And I definitely lived that growing up. So I don't think there was ever a doubt that I would serve in some capacity or another. Mm-hmm. But having the opportunity to be a military officer and to lead American soldiers was something I couldn't pass up when I had the chance to go to West Point when I was choosing colleges way back in the 1990s.
What were the conditions like in Afghanistan?
So I can speak specifically to my experiences, but there's a really diverse set of experiences there. Because again, you have a massive operation taking place across a pretty large country. So you have large supply bases, large command and control bases where they run the war out of. Those were in Kabul and those were in Kandahar airfield. So those are the 2 main large hubs in Afghanistan. And those were largely secure. A lot of the creature comforts of home you would have there, like if you have bases in Germany or Japan, a lot of the similar creature comforts I use, access to restaurants, access to choices with food, better gyms. So it was, again, combat environment, so rather comfortable at those bases. As you go further out into the countryside or into the cities where you're operating, it's a little more austere. And so I think my experience is somewhere right in the middle. Again, you had really austere bases that are in the really remote areas in eastern Afghanistan or in northwest Afghanistan. I was situated in Kandahar City, which was the 2nd largest city in Afghanistan, a city of about 800,000 people. Kandahar is often referred to as the spiritual home of the Taliban. It's really the ethnic capital of the Pashtuns. The Pashtuns is the large ethnic group that populates a lot of really southern, southeast Afghanistan and across the Pakistani border into the northern reaches of Pakistan. So the Pashtun ethnic group occupies basically, or situated in 2 countries. with kind of an unnatural political border that kind of divides where the Pashtuns live. So Kandahar City is where we were located, in a place called Camp Nathan Smith. It is a large base in the heart of downtown Kandahar City. Not the creature comforts you'd have at the large bases like Kandahar Airfield or in Kabul. But it was enough to get us by, enough to sustain with ammunition, fuel, food, and enough of the communications gear to get us ready to plan and carry out operations. And not very comfortable beds.
So, in what ways were you able to maintain hope throughout the war?
So by 2011, by the time I deployed, I'd been in Iraq in 2004, 2005, slightly different political mission, slightly different military mission, but by the time 2011 rolls around, especially in Kandahar province and Kandahar city, you talk about maintaining hope. The idea, the big picture idea was to maintain security by connecting each smaller unit of governance or society to the larger. You wanted to, the bumper sticker sort of read, connecting the village to the town to the city to the province to the federal government. And that model was sort of based on largely trying to create a maybe Western-based, Western-style democratic government. I think that was the ultimate objective. So if that was the political strategic objective, the goal at the local level was to establish an environment where people could live peaceful, secure lives. And it's right. So the idea of hope there was to try to impose. I know that's a very aggressive term, but impose or achieve security for the locals across Kandahar city. So if there's any sign of hope, I guess you measured hope by the number of violent incidents that you might have within Kandahar city against the populace. You might measure that by the number of hours per day they had electricity. You might measure that by their access to markets and the markets having access to fresh food for the local populace. And in terms of that's hope at the local level, but I think hope at the political level by 2011 is pretty hard to grasp.
Yeah.
Right, we're deployed 10 years into the conflict with the idea of imposing this sort of Western-style democratic governance on a country that's never really experienced, doesn't have a long history of experiencing or practicing that sort of government. So hope was very fleeting at the political strategic level.
On October 8th, 2011, Walters and several other soldiers were debriefing a mission together. Around this time, a few Afghan individuals had entered the compound armed with a rocket grenade launcher. Though the soldiers were noticed, they were not out of the ordinary enough to cause alarm. They soon began to attack. Sort of a switch in topic. Can you walk us through the day you were shot by one of the soldiers? What happened and how did you respond?
Yeah, so that's part of one of the United Nations sponsored missions. It's called Ulama. They were trying to assemble a group of tribal and religious leaders in Kandahar city to find some way to build a coalition to oppose the Taliban. The idea, again, making an Afghan face, was to have Afghan local leadership participate in the effort to kind of push Taliban influence out. So we were running a United Nations brokered mission in downtown Kandahar city. And so again, we had Afghan police, Afghan army, Afghan commandos, and Afghan security services all operating with me in downtown Kandahar. So I'm running the outpost. We have extremely tight security on the outsides running in. And so again, these are people that we've grown to partner with. Like in a question a couple of minutes ago, you asked about that. So these were units that we had worked with on other operations. We'd done a similar operation about 2 weeks prior to provide security, to increase security across Kandahar city. And so this is what we were doing in October 2011, in early October 2011, trying to build that security forces. So again, these are joint command posts. We have American soldiers, American officers sitting with Afghan officers, and just monitoring the days of activities. Turns out that the increased presence of Afghan and U.S. forces there was very little violence. There were a couple, as I recall, instances of contact, meaning exchanges of fires across Kandahar city that day, but nothing out of the ordinary. So it seemed like a pretty routine day. Kind of context-wise, across other parts of Helmand province, Kandahar province, and up north, a tactic that the insurgents had been adopting, the Taliban had been adopting, were to initiate attacks on U.S. or coalition bases with either a vehicle-borne IED or some sort of rocket-propelled grenade attack in order to like both breach a hole in the physical security of the forces, and then to storm through the breach with small arms fire, with people armed with AK-47s or RPK machine guns. And so we were very attuned to that technique. So that night after, I guess, our partners, it kind of struck me as odd that at a certain time, again, call to prayer time, there's certain times that there are different cultural norms, they're going to behave differently. But when all of these Afghan partners pulled back at a certain point in my command post, leaving just a few of them with us, we said, okay, we're gonna raise our security level. We're sort of alert to something odd was going on. We were doing a kind of a mission brief with my officers for the next day's mission and talking a little long term about security. Then the techniques that the Taliban are using, I had mentioned, happened. Large explosion. So immediately, I hear a large explosion. Here we go. I think those were my words that the report says. Here we go. And so we all go to get our weapons because our security forces outside are starting to engage, but then the firing starts coming into our command post. And so a command post it's a tent, but it looks large, it's well lit, there's computers, there's screens, you're operating. So before we could even respond, fire starts coming into our command post. So we didn't even have time to kind of establish that interior security once that started. So it turned out that it wasn't an outside force. It wasn't a Taliban trying to infiltrate. It was one of our partners. The lingo is green on blue. Green being the description of our partner forces, blue being U.S. forces. And so it was a case of, again, it was a Taliban infiltrator who had infiltrated the unit that we were working with and opened fire on us. So one of his partners fired a rocket-propelled grenade at one of our security towers, and then two of his other partners started shooting into our command post. Mm-hmm. And so ended up killing two of my battle captains and wounding about 5 or 6 others.
We're glad you're okay.
Thank you.
So what was going through your mind, like, in the immediate aftermath of the incident? And, like, how did it affect your perspective on your role as officer?
Well, in the immediate moment, you want to reestablish security, and you want to make sure that your guys are taken care of, right? And so you're trying to, I was hit, but I recall just making sure guys are getting on the radios, make sure the guys are starting to call in the medical evacuation on the radios, trying to make sure to coordinate security otherwise. Because you have a non-commissioned officer, a senior sergeant in charge too, and that sergeant fortunately was not wounded. So the sergeant got on the radio, and we started trying to reestablish security. Again, not knowing exactly at the time, really in the first few moments of this, you don't know, right? When you're taking fire, right, the expectation was not that you take fire from the people that you're working with, that you've gotten accustomed with. The expectation is that you are taking fire from outside. So the whole idea going through my mind is establish the outside perimeter to kind of regain the initiative against whatever attack was happening against us. But, the firing stopped, right? And because the shooters fled. So once the shooting stopped, and once after a couple moments you realize, okay, that's probably it. Then you start doing the triage. Our medics were fantastic. We had one of our medics was wounded. Actually, in that explosion was a rocket-propelled grenade fired at our ambulance truck. So that part of the attack wounded one of my medics. But fortunately, I had a few other medics that were quickly taking care of the wounded soldiers. So at that point, once you knew that it was relatively secure, because then we had our own security force now kind of figuring things, what had happened, and sort of isolating our part within the Afghan base. Then we got on the radio and started coordinating the medical evacuation, which were evac helicopters out of Kandahar Airfield. Mm-hmm. And so, you're wounded, but your role continues, right? You're still in charge. You're still responsible for all of those. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, you don't have, I knew that one of my guys was gone. I knew that one of my guys was hurt pretty bad, but you still have to focus in on the larger mission. Seems kind of impersonal when you got to focus on a larger mission versus just, the well-being of one person. but that's just the way we're trained, right? That the mission has to persist as long as you guys are taken care of. And as soon as we knew that the medical evacuation was inbound, then you sort of hand it off to the your non-commissioned officers who were in charge.
Last question on this specific thing. How did the military respond to the incident? Like, what kind of support did you get? What kind of support did you get? Like mental, emotional, physical?
So again, almost 10 years into the war in Afghanistan, and the military healthcare system had adapted very well to that. And you talk about of mental health and physical recovery did very well. I think so I was evacuated to Kandahar airfield. Then after initial, that I was taken to Kabul and Bagram airfield, then evacuated to Landstuhl, which is in Germany, which is the regional hospital. Then back here to Walter Reed. So like the acute medical care, like the medics that we trained, the medics that were on site, and then the next levels of medical care were outstanding. I think I'm just one example of thousands over the course of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that they treat, but they applied new medical technology and excellent training, and they saved a lot of American lives and Allied lives, not just American lives, a lot of Allied lives over the course of the war. So that acute line medical care was outstanding, really, nothing to worry about. Over the longer haul, once again, I'm a pretty physical person, so I want to run, I want to get back into it. Once you get back into the regular medical system, maybe there's a little left to be desired in the military healthcare system. But as far as offering the provision of mental health support was always there. So again, this was a huge adaptation for the military establishment from the post-Vietnam era, right? This was a generational change in the way they took care of both the physical and sort of the kind of the psychological outcomes of war. So I think that's a very positive outcome, I think, of the experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan.
What advice would you give to future soldiers about staying vigilant and managing the unexpected in their careers?
So we can talk about the careers. We can talk about just like a thematic piece here. So staying vigilant, I think that's just all about preparation. And so you're able to stay vigilant because you're prepared. Right? Being vigilant implies just preparation, right? Having an idea of what's possible, what possibly could happen. So I think that is so implicit in every approach to and every way you carry out training in the military. It's called contingency planning, of being aware of things that could happen that don't go according to plan. And so I think that goes down to the individual level, but also as you go up the chain and as you assume leadership positions, of having an idea of the potential paths any operation can take. So that's like at the tactical level what you're doing. You got to just be prepared. You've got to train for all the contingencies. You have to rehearse. It's preparation. That's why I think there's a lot of sports metaphors to the military. Is that preparation means you're able to execute, means you're able to stay vigilant for all the different contingencies that can happen. So I think that's sort of like implicit, and that's something I would advise. And it's almost that training itself is not a philosophy, but the idea of repetition, the idea of making sure that you hone those skills is so important to everything you do in the military. And really, it translates to just about everything we do in life, right? You talked about careers, though, on staying vigilant. That's a harder thing because, when you're in the military, certain people join the military with aspirations to be generals and admirals someday, right? And that was never me. You want to, it sort of sounds idealistic, but you just want to do well in what you're doing. You want to be the best you can be at what you're doing, and that's what I would, advise looking back. Is just stay focused on what you're doing. Don't worry about the next job, because if you do well at what you're doing now, and if you take care of your people, they'll take care of you, right? If you treat your people with a little bit of empathy, a little bit of respect, a lot of respect actually, and you treat them like human beings, they will come back and take care of you. That's something that was, I was fortunate because my people took care of me in every way. Just, the physical ways we just talked about, they took care of me, but also in the figurative ways of just being good teammates, of being good people to work with. They took care of you. And so if you have people that take care of you and you do the best you can at your job, well, the next job or the next promotion is going to take care of itself, right? And I think that stands in opposition to a lot of, times where people are just always seeking that next because they're not focusing on where they are at the moment. Obviously, you have to have some ambition, right? In anything in life, you have to have some ambition. But if the ambition is the overriding motivator rather than being the best you can be at the job you're doing at the time, then that sort of imbalance can get you in trouble. And that's sort of the advice I would give to people joining the military, is just be the best you can be at the job and take care of your people. Mm-hmm. It's not just a bumper sticker.
Anything else?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. I learned a lot.
I did too.
Yeah.
In 2021, President Biden authorized a complete withdrawal of American troops, marking the end of America's involvement in Afghanistan. This resulted in a surge of refugees attempting to escape the country following the Taliban's almost immediate government takeover. Since then, America has been dealing with the repercussions of the chaotic withdrawal with moderate success. Throughout the interview, Keith Walters has spoken on the humanities he has seen through the war and how the most valiant thing you can do is try to help.